Anime has a sexual assault problem. And after watching Lady Anshi's story in the Apothecary Diaries and Amo's story in Gachiakuta, I realized that we are past the time of needing to talk about this. I'm Appa the Otaku. If you're new here, welcome. And if you're not new here, welcome back. Today, we're going to be shining a light on one of anime's darkest problems. In the past, as a woman who watches anime, when I would express discomfort at certain scenes, I would always be met with mostly men who would push back and say things like, "Don't be so sensitive, it's just Japanese culture." And after hearing that so many times, I just started to accept it as true. Yet, when I moved to Japan 2 years ago, admittedly knowing nothing about the culture outside of they were the ones making anime, I quickly learned that the over-sexualization that we see in mainstream anime is in fact not Japan's culture. At least not in the ways that people in the West make it seem. But we'll get into that later. And in addition to finding out that that was not just Japan's culture, I also learned that for years, Japanese people, particularly Japanese women and other people throughout Asia, have lent their voices to speak out against this over-sexualization and the rampant sexual violence against women that's often found in anime and manga. And mangakas like Natsuhyuga from the Apothecary Diaries and Kei Urana from Gachiakuta are really the culmination of all of those voices over all of those years, at least symbolically. And today, I'm going to lend my voice to that cause as well. As usual, we're going to break today's video down into 3 sections. First, we have to confront that regardless of what people on the internet may want to believe, the sexual assault issue in anime is not an issue of yesteryear. It is happening today in mainstream anime and manga in 2026. Despite years, decades of people pushing back against it, not only in Japan, but abroad as well. Then we're going to examine Lady Anshi's role in the Apothecary Diaries, not just as a victim of sexual assault, but more specifically as someone who takes revenge against her abuser and how that's received as a result of the sexual assault issue that's already existing in anime. And then we're going to discuss what I believe is maybe one of the most poignant segments on sexual assault in mainstream anime, and that's Amo's backstory from Gachiakuta. And the point of unpacking all of this is just to say, yes, anime does have a sexual assault problem, but right now, if you are a woman or a girl who loves anime, we are in the best possible time to be fans of the genre because there are women mangakas that are speaking out against this, that are using their voices, using their airtime, using their publishing to speak out against this publicly. And we should all be lending our voices to their cause and highlighting the work that they're doing. Quick disclaimer, for ease of speech, I will be using sexual assault and assault interchangeably and as a general term for sexual assault, trafficking, pedophilia, sexualization, over-sexualization, rape, and sexual harassment. So now let's get into this. I made a TikTok about this exact subject about a couple of weeks ago, and something that kept coming up in the comments that really had me flabbergasted was the idea that the sexual assault issue in anime no longer exists, and that's just not true. The My Hero Academia anime just completed 5 full seasons of sexualizing Yaoyorozu, a 16-year-old high school girl. Now, if you've never seen My Hero Academia, I'm just going to give you a brief overview. All of these main and supporting characters have different quirks. Her quirk is that she can make tangible items from her body, right? The proteins, the lipids in her body. And in order to do that, a certain amount of flesh needs to be shown for whatever reason. Okay, perhaps, fair enough. I don't think it warrants this costume, but let's just go with it. Now here is Mirio, a male counterpart also in the show. Now his quirk is that when he activates his power, he permeates through all objects, including his own clothes. So he'll just disrobe, which would put him in a sort of similar issue as far as what costume should he wear, right? Very similar to Yaoyorozu. Except in this universe, they have the technology to make his uniform out of his own hair so that it will permeate with him. Why wouldn't Yaoyorozu's uniform also be made out of her own hair so that things could be produced through it? It's a very distinct choice to sexualize a 16-year-old girl. And please don't even get me started on when they had Hagakure, another 16-year-old girl, naked on the anime cover. Now, I'm not going to show it here because ew. I think it came out in 2022 and I'm not sure if they've edited or revised it yet. I will look that up. My Hero Academia is not alone in this. We can look at Tamaki from Fire Force. Now, people often talk about Tamaki's Lucky Lecture lure as fan service, and I too dropped the show because I felt like that fan service was a bit out of control. But shortly after dropping the show, I learned that not only are they putting her in these highly sexual situations that the character doesn't even enjoy being in, she's 17. So they're doing this to a minor repeatedly over and over and over again. And again, I've since dropped the show and manga, and I've had people say that towards the end, they reveal a very plot specific reason for why her clothes need to come off for this lure or this curse, however you want to phrase it as. But the point of making her a minor and choosing to sexualize her repeatedly over and over and over again, putting her in these repeated situations where she can be sexually harassed, looked at, ogled, and she's 17 is a choice that is indicative of anime sexual assault problem. And again, people have been ringing the alarm for years. Scholarly articles dating back to the 80s can be found with people raising the issue of the sexual assault problem so prevalent in the anime and manga group, written by Japanese scholars and scholars in the West. Before I go any further, I do want to make it a point to say when I was doing my research for this video, I did find a lot of articles from scholars in the West who were raising these kinds of issues. And I do believe that some of them were completely disingenuous. A lot of people referenced the fact that the age of consent in Japan, back in those days, it's much higher now, but back then was only 13 years old. But the reality is that's also the age of consent in, I think, the majority of states in America as well. It's also 13 years old. It's something that America likes to hide, but is true nonetheless. So it just felt a bit disingenuous reading people from the West trying to condemn Japan as if America was not doing the same thing, which is why I say when people call it Japan's culture, I mean, it's as much Japan's culture as is America's culture, but we don't see that in the West, in America. So it's not quite the same thing. I just needed to put that disclaimer out there. I hope you guys also do some research, but just be prepared to run into people being a bit disingenuous. Anyway, considering that I myself am not a Japanese woman or even a Japanese scholar or even an Asian scholar, I thought it would be a bit disingenuous to not highlight the work that many Japanese and Asian people have done to highlight this issue. My research revealed that throughout the years, several scholars have produced books, articles, essays highlighting the very problematic issue that anime has regarding sexual assault, pedophilia, and just overall violence against women and even young boys. And I say young boys because I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge that we're also seeing the sexualization of young boys, high school, middle school characters in some of these animes as well. That being said, if this is a topic that really intrigues you, here are 3 resources that I found really helpful while I was researching for this video that you may also enjoy. The first is a book by John A. Lent. It's called Themes and Issues in Asian Cartooning, which talks about a lot of different things, not just anime and manga, but I do want to highlight this book because it was the first text that I had found that talked about how in the early 90s, a movement filled with feminists, PTA members, housewives, teachers, and other well-meaning and good moral people in Japan that arose in order to ban harmful manga. And this movement was so powerful, it led to arrests, it led to shop closures for people who are selling that kind of material. These people in Japan have been working to try to contain some of this nastiness that we're seeing, and I don't think they get enough recognition, and I really appreciated this book for opening my eyes. The second is an article that I'll link below. It's called The Sexual Objectification of Girls in Anime Series, and it uses Sarah Mill's critical analysis to evaluate Mushoku Tensei, I believe. I've never seen that, but apparently it's trash, so not here to recommend it either. And this was someone's thesis coming out of Indonesia, so a separate part of Asia. But it essentially talks about how animes use the idea that sex sells as an excuse to sexualize these young girls and put these young girls in harm's way, which when I first saw it, I thought that was a really interesting aspect of looking at things. But then I realized that a lot of times, and she discusses this as well, a lot of times these mangakas who write material like this will hide behind the fact that they're not real girls, they're fake girls, and so the lines can be a bit blurred. But I love the way she tackles the sexual objectification of the children of the girls in this series. And if you've ever seen the series, you might really enjoy this essay. And it's only like 20 pages. It's not that long. Another article that I found that I think you guys would find really interesting is called Sexual Violence Against Women in Shoujo Manga. And this was a quantitative study that was done. And I just want to read that the study then hinted at a pattern of sexual violence in shoujo manga supporting the original hypothesis. 60% of the sample had at least one scene of sexual violence, and some series had numerous instances of sexual violence. And this to me was so striking because he is specifically looking at shoujo anime, or shoujo manga in this case, which is targeted at young girls, normalizing it for young girls. These are the kinds of issues that people have done the research to find and to expose and to shed light on. And if this is something you care about, I would highly recommend reading at least the articles. The book you might not want to pay for, but at least the articles, I think they're really good. And when I think about the work that these people have done with these books, with these articles, that's what I mean when I say that Gachiakuta and the Apothecary Diaries are almost like a culmination of all of that hard work because of how they tackle the issues in what is now mainstream animes and mangas. One of the things that captivated me the most about the Apothecary Diaries was how the story used themes like consent, storylines involving sex work, and the backdrop of the imperial palace to talk about an issue as heavy and as nuanced as sexual assault. And this is also what led me to put out my 3-part series on consent as a theme in the Apothecary Diaries. If you have not already seen it, I would strongly suggest you go check it out. I think it's some of my best work as an academic otaku, if I must say so myself, okay? And they're linked below, so you could check that out too. But let's move on. No, in all seriousness, one thing that I explored in that 3-part series is I think that it's very easy for people to jump on Jinshi and Mao Mao's relationship because it's easy to be digested. But I have seen hundreds, if not thousands at this point, of people mischaracterize and totally misunderstand Lady Anshi's character and her role within the story. If you have not seen the Apothecary Diaries, or if you've seen it and you're just struggling to understand some beats, I'm going to give you a quick synopsis. Lady Anshi is the mother of the current emperor, and she is only 10 years older than him. And the reason why she's only 10 years older than him is because the former emperor was a pedophile. This is very important because the story goes out of its way to tell us that the only thing we really need to know about the former emperor is that he is a pedophile. Nothing else about him matters as much as the fact that he is a pedophile. This is important. So at 10 years old, the former emperor chooses Lady Anshi to be his next victim. She gets pregnant. She has what is now the current emperor in the story's timeline. I think it's 10 or 15 years later. I think she's 20 or 25. She sees that he is still going out and he's still doing this to these girls. He's still terrorizing these girls. He is still traumatizing these girls. For her, she sees all that, but then she also feels discarded. You used me and now you just don't even want to look at me. This makes her very angry. But at this point in the story, she's the empress. They're legally married. And so now she's 25 and she goes into the bedroom and she rapes him back. It is such a traumatic experience for him that his mind snaps and he has to be isolated away from all people, including the little girls that he was tormenting and traumatizing. And don't get me wrong, I have a blanket opinion that rape is never okay. That being said, when she did what she did, she put an end to his reign of terror, to his legacy of pedophilia and child grooming, and she saved hundreds of little girls from fates worse than death. I have seen people label Lady Anshi as the aggressor. I've seen people, hand to God, say that she wanted to be raped at 10, that she orchestrated it at 10, because in her own musings, she described her 10-year-old self as ambitious. And I think it's so asinine to do that for a lot of reasons, but the first one that really comes to mind is you can go outside and throw a stone and hit a 10-year-old girl that wants to be a princess. I wanted to be a princess at 10, but if you would have explained to me that I would have to let an old man touch my private parts in order to do that, I would have reconsidered. So people trying to victim blame Lady Anshi, I think, again, is part of anime's sexual assault problem. It consistently downplays the act of sexual assault and the aftermath of sexual assault. Walk with me here. This is a reflection of rape culture as illustrated by anime. A man assaulting a woman is normalized, but a woman assaulting a man is striking. It's jarring. It wars against the ideologies of rape culture that we, as women in the 21st century, have been indoctrinated into. It makes us believe that since she forces herself back on him 10, 15 years later, she's no longer the perfect victim. And if she's no longer the perfect victim, then she must be the aggressor. And I really do try to give the women in my comments who say stuff like this, that 10-year-old lady Anshi was the orchestrator of her own sexual assault. I really do try to give them grace. I really do. Because I understand how indoctrination messes with your mind. But the Apothecary Diaries has such a direct and explicit stance on abusers and what is and isn't sexual assault. It has a stance on who is the aggressor and who is the victim, on what you should think of the aggressors, and maybe not so much what you should think of the victims, but absolutely what you should think of the aggressors. And more specifically, through Lady Anshi, it shows us its stance on if the victim has a right to revenge, and it is a clear and astounding yes, they do. And I think that Lady Anshi as a character is so revolutionary and yet still being so badly mischaracterized and misunderstood in the year of our Lord 2026. But I can't imagine a time in history where her actions would have been better received. And so I love that she is included in there. And I love that the Apothecary Diaries in both the anime, the novel, and the manga show us exactly what it thinks a victim's right to revenge, to avengement, is in those cases. And truly, whether people have the critical thinking skills to comprehend what Lady Anshi's role is in this story about consent isn't the point. Point is that she's still a symbol, and she does her job so efficiently, and Natsuhyuga has crafted her to be an excellent tool to really highlight her stance on sexual assault and victims' rights. As I said before, far too often in anime and manga, issues of sexual assault or depictions of sexual assault are swept under the rug. Or worse, they're made light of, trivialized. And so it's refreshing, I think, to see the Apothecary Diaries be so direct on how it feels regarding sexual assault and victims' rights to revenges. Which brings us to Amo. And truly, I've said it before and I'll say it again, I think Amo's backstory in Gachiakuta is maybe the most poignant clip in modern mainstream anime regarding trafficking, sexual violence, pedophilia, grooming, rape, sexual assault, and sexual harassment. Full stop. If you've never seen the show, look, pause this. I'll be here later. Pause this. And go watch the first 12 episodes. You don't even got to get that far. Just watch the first 12 episodes of Gachiakuta and then come back so you can see it for yourself, okay? No, in all seriousness, I'll give you guys a quick recap of her story. If you haven't seen it or if you just need a quick refresher, essentially Amo is a young lady. I think she's 20. She lives all alone in this isolated tower in the middle of nowhere. And we meet her and she's kind of quirky, I would describe her as. She's the bad guy when we first meet her, right? She's going against our protagonist. And shortly after they defeat her, we get her backstory. Now, I think her backstory is stunning in the visualization because Gachiakuta has a very edgy, very cool, very modern, very cyberpunk type art style. And when it switches into her backstory, it switches into more of like the crayon-like doodles of a child, which already puts you in the mindset that, okay, we're about to hear about someone's trauma because why are we getting her backstory from the viewpoint of a child? And we learned that it's because when she was young, maybe she's 5 or 6 in that clip, she was trafficked by her mom. We're not sure when he starts raping her, but he does. And that goes on for years and years and years and years until the guy has like these very special boots. And some people come, I don't want to ruin the whole story, but like, let's say some people come and are like, hey, those boots, they would look much better on you. And she puts that into her mind. She asks for the boots. He doesn't want to give them to her. Long story short, he like kind of falls out of the window in their tug of war trying to get the boots and dies. And she starts wearing the boots with the outfit she has on. The outfit she has on is, I guess you could classify it as revealing, but also if you're paying attention to the timeline of the cartoon drawings, she's had that same outfit on since she was 6. This is important. We're going to circle back to it later. I think more than her backstory, I think her outfit choice is so beautifully jarring because initially, before we get to the backstory, it looks like she's just an over-sexualized character. She's quite literally busting out of her clothes. But then we get her backstory, right? And it's revealed that this was the only thing her captor ever let her have, ever let her wear, right? He was arguing with her about some shoes. Mind you, he's never given her shoes before, right? So she's grown up 10, 15 years in the dress that she's had since she was 6 years old. And it's another example, as if we needed one more, but it is another example of the cruelty of her captor. Also, when we think about the sexual assault problem in anime, Amo's choice of dress highlights an issue that women everywhere, not just in women in anime, but women everywhere have been facing. And it's highlighted within her conversation with Engine. So Amo is trying to figure out, what is y'all here for? Because they done ran down on her in her home. Okay. She's like, what's going on? Y'all trying to be friends? Like, what's tea? Engine, one of the main characters, says, you have to put some clothes on because I can't think when your chest is out. And Amo says something that I hope goes down in feminist history as one of the most iconic lines of all times. She says, so it's Amo's fault that you like Amo's outfit too much? This line is so important because on a larger scale, I think it addresses the over-sexualization of women just existing. She's not wearing that outfit with the intention of seduction. Again, it is literally the only thing that her captor of 15 years has ever allowed her to own, to have, to wear. And the fact that he's gone and she's still wearing it, I think is a textbook example of a symptom of trauma. But more than that, I absolutely love that she poses this question because again, it interrogates a narrative that has been too long allowed to thrive in anime. And that's the idea that because an outfit is drawn to be revealing, you are supposed to look. That what she's wearing somehow warrants sexual harassment. And we can go back to Yaoyorozu. We can go back to Tamaki. We can examine Nezuko from Demon Slayer. We can unpack every character in Food Wars. The issue of sexual assault in anime is not Amo's issue alone. And unfortunately, Amo's trauma is not even unique to Amo. But the voices of the people who have been speaking out against this have been systematically drowned out. But in the year of our Lord 2026, we must make the decision to fight back. I'm not done yet, but if you've made it this far, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and share this video with somebody you know who loves anime but hates the way depictions of sexual assault are handled in these animes. Let's get a conversation going. All right, let's recap. Anime's issue with sexual assault and pedophilia is unfortunately not an issue of the past. And despite all of the voices that have been lifted up to shed light on this issue, we're still not as far along as we should be in addressing it. Lady Anshi's story in the Apothecary Diaries is revolutionary in modern mainstream anime because it punctuates the retelling of a victim's story with revenge, not just letting it go or even falling into obscurity. And Amo's story in Gachiakuta forces us to confront the connotation that we normally associate with characters drawn a certain way or in a certain style of dress with the reality of how they got there. And I, for one, am ready for the next mainstream anime to pop up that can address issues of sexual assault in anime with the correct level of earnestness, of care, of nuance that stories like the Apothecary Diaries and Gachiakuta have done. And I'm hoping that someday in the very near future, at least in my lifetime of being an otaku, we can completely divest from these animes that touch on these issues in ways that make them humorous or normalized. Because all things considered, I still believe we are in one of the most exciting times to be a woman anime fan. The mangakas are fighting back and we must do what we can to highlight their stories, to amplify their stories, to cut out the noise that makes us believe that this kind of behavior is normalized in Japan, abroad, for the reality of women everywhere, etc. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching this video. I really hope that I handled this with the level of care that it demands. If you've been following my content on here, then you know I am very passionate about topics like these. And I will continue to talk about things in the anime community that I am passionate about on here as I see fit. If there's anything you guys would specifically like to see, let me know in the comments. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next video. Jane.